The purpose of this video is to give us a little bit of background information on plant tissues. Just like our animal tissues video, there are slides that are just background. So I would like you to take notes, and the ones that are background, you don't specifically need to take notes. I won't specifically be testing those, but just like the animal video, they're here for a reason. And that is because you're going to see some of these things in our lab. And so just because it's background doesn't mean it's not important. It's going to help you get through the lab, and it's going to support the information on the slides that you need to take notes on. Plants are, of course, organized into different tissues that come together into organs and then organ systems. Just to kind of give you an idea of the different types of organ systems in a plant, we have two major systems. We've got our root system, which is made up of roots that are an organ, of course made up of tissues that are going to help with absorption and getting nutrients. And then we've got our shoot system, which is made up of several smaller systems, including our flower system, buds, branches, and stems. So our plants have three general types of organs. I didn't ask you to know any specific organs for animals, just to put plants into some context because their tissues are probably less familiar. I would like you to know the organs for a plant. Honestly, this is probably not anything new that you don't already know. But just to give you some definitions, we've got three organs for our plants. We've got the stems. Of course, this is where we have our leaves and branches, and we're focusing on angiosperms. But for all of our plants, this is where we have our reproductive structures. So for angiosperms, it's specifically our flowers and our fruits and our seeds, along with those leaves and branches. Of course, we've got the leaves themselves, which are their own organ, and you all know that they are specialized for photosynthesis. They're wide and flat usually, or long and flat, to increase their surface area for photosynthesis. And then, of course, our roots, they have two functions. They function to anchor our plant into our soil. And there are different types of roots depending on the different type of plant, but their job is initially to anchor down the plant because the plant needs to stay put. And then, of course, they also work to take water and nutrients up from the soil and move them to other parts of the plant. So just very, very briefly, our plant tissue comes from structures called meristems. Plants are obviously different in animals in that they can sort of produce new growth from different regions of their bodies. So if you have a stem, you can get new growth off of the stem, whereas animals are not growing new arms off of their bodies. And the reason that plants can do this is because of structures called meristems. Meristems are generally going to occur at the tips of our shoots and our roots, although there are specific places where meristems can occur that are not at the tips of the shoots and the roots. So for example, wherever we're getting a little branch off of a side of a plant, this is another meristem. So the meristems can remain dormant, but they can then activate when it's growing season and time to produce those new shoots and roots. Generally, they're going to be at the tip. So for example, the root tip is a meristem that is producing root tissue. Shoot tips are producing our leaves and our branches. So there are one main type of tissue in our plants, at least as far as what we are covering, and that is the vascular tissue. This shouldn't be anything new. We've already covered general structure of plants. We've already covered vascular tissue. So remember, there are two types of vascular tissue. The xylem conducts water and anything that is dissolved in the water, such as minerals, through the leaf. So the xylem is actually going to run all the way from the root through the stem or the shoot up to the leaves. So I realize it just says water and minerals through the leaf, but there is going to be vascular tissue all the way from the root, because we have to get water all the way from the root where we're getting water in the soil all the way up through the shoot to the leaves. And water has several different functions in our plants. Two main functions are in photosynthesis. We need water for photosynthesis to occur, and we also need water to help with the structure of our plant cells. So when our plant cells fill up with water, they actually provide support for the cell, in addition to the cell walls and the lignin that we've already talked about. And then our phloem carries sugar products in the opposite direction from our leaves to the stem to the other parts of our plant. So the xylem is basically going to take water up. The phloem is going to take our sugar and nutrients down, or at least down away from the leaf. So that might be into the stem, it might be all the way down to the roots. We are going to look at vascular bundles in our lab. This slide is more geared toward the lab, but I would like you to take some notes, just because you're going to need to identify these vascular bundles in our plants in lab. So it might be a good idea to make a quick sketch of this, or you can go back to the posted lab notes in the lab materials folder for our tissues lab and print up this document. This is just showing the different places that we see xylem and phloem, and you probably are going to want to reference this when we get to the lab. So looking at our root system, our root function is to anchor our plants and absorb those nutrients. Because the phloem is taking water down, a phloem is taking our sugars down, those roots are getting all of their nutrients from the leaves up at the top. So roots obviously are not performing photosynthesis because they're down underground, and so they need to get their sugar molecules for cellular respiration and energy all the way down from the leaves. So that vascular system is going to run through the plant down to the roots. And then at the tip of our roots, we have the apical meristem. So our roots are actually growing out from the tip. They don't grow out from the base of the plant. They grow out from the tip because that is where the apical meristem is located. So our xylem is actually a pretty complex tissue structure. Our plants are going to be made up of two levels of xylem structure. We have primary xylem and also primary phloem, and then secondary xylem and secondary phloem. And those are present depending on the type of plant that we have. So our herbaceous plants, think of our little dandelions or flowers in a field. These are going to be herbaceous, non-woody plants, and they are going to be made up of primary xylem. So there are a couple different types of cells that make up xylem tissue, and mostly this is here because we're going to cover this in our lab. So I just want you to generally be familiar with the different types of tissues. The main types of tissues that are transporting water and conducting water are going to be the tracheids and the vessel elements. These grow, and then as they mature, they actually die off. And then because they've died and no longer have all of the functional cell parts, basically their cytoplasm is sort of dries up, and then the tracheids and the vessel elements can actually help with water flow. So they are essentially a cell skeleton that allows water to move up through the plant. So this image here is really just to show you what the different type of xylem cells look like. We've got the tracheids, which are much thinner than our vessel elements. We've got the tracheids along here, vessel elements along the center. Remember that they are essentially cell skeletons, but also remember from our discussion on plants that they are lined with lignin, which helps with support and also functions to reduce decay. So it basically waterproofs these cells, acts as a lining so that they can facilitate water movement. So just like our xylem, our phloem is made up of long, thin tubes that act essentially as pipes um, through our plant. We aren't going to look at phloem as much, but I want you to just kind of be familiar with these long, thin tube-shaped pipes, just like the xylem. So throughout our plant, we've got our vascular tissue moving, um, and we've got two different types of vascular tissue depending on basically the overall structure of our plant. So we have the primary vascular tissue that we just talked about, made up of those tracheids and vessels and sieve tubes. But then we also have in our woody plants what we call secondary vascular tissue. So secondary vascular tissue forms essentially around the primary vascular tissue, and we actually can have different layers of vascular tissue. The wood and bark structures of our woody plants are made up of essentially different layers of xylem and phloem. And we're not going to talk about the development here. We're not even going to talk about the differences in the functions, except that as a whole, wood provides structure and support to allow our plants to get much, much bigger. But wood is really dense, it's really hard, and it is built in layers moving sort of out from the center. So in the center, we have our primary xylem, and then as the plant grows, it accumulates a second layer of xylem around the primary layer. And this is because as the plant grows outward, we need to get nutrients farther out in our plant. And so we build this second layer on the outside. Remember that our meristems happen at our root tips and our shoot tips. And so they are, we're only seeing growth from those directions. As far as the layers of our wood and bark, we have to kind of build layers on the outside of our primary layers in order to get that xylem tissue and the phloem tissue. Outside of that, we have the phloem, and then outside of that, we basically have expansion. So outside of our primary layers, we get sort of crushed layers that eventually make the bark. So as our plant expands out from the center, we get more and more layers of bark. So just like our vascular tissue slide, this one is here mostly to show you what we're going to be seeing in our lab. It would probably be a good idea to reference this during our lab because it's going to show you where the different layers of xylem and phloem are found. And you can see that they occur in rings. So we've got our layers of primary xylem. This in this case is not actually showed, it's kind of in the center. And then we've got secondary xylem on the outside, followed by phloem, and then our outer bark.